Musical Talk, the UK's independent musical theatre podcast. Hello and welcome to Musical Talk. I'm Thos Ribbits and I am your host, as they used to say in Cabaret. And not only am I your host for today's episode of Musical Talk, I'm also host to a parasitical virus. Because, ladies and gentlemen, I have a cold. So I hope you will excuse my voice, even more so than usual, because it is a little bit affected by cold symptoms, making me sound a little husky, a little nasal, and perhaps a little more manly, although the latter seems so unlikely as to be worth discounting. Well, what are we going to talk about today? Well, it's actually a continuation of that on-off conversation and discussion that we've been having here on Musical Talk about when did popular music and theatre music diverge. You may remember my original theory a few months back in episode 328, when I was talking about rhythm becoming more popular in 1950s music, which meant that lyrics in popular song were, if you like, sidelined to a degree, and meaning was sacrificed for rhythm or beat or backbeat. And as a result, musical theatre had to find its own path, because lyrics still were very essential as the principal conveyor of meaning. I also asked people to write to me with their views and thoughts, and lots of people have done so my great thanks to everyone. You may also remember that in last week's episode, I had a bit of a conversation with Michael Gordon Shapiro about this very matter. Now, the conversation has moved on a bit. People have been talking about jukebox musicals and pop films. So I thought it would be a good idea to sit down with Tim Saywood and chew it over to see where we've got to and to see what he thought about the principal idea, to see if it led us anywhere. And that's going to be what you hear later in the episode. But we're going to start with a few of those comments that some of our listeners have provided to us. And the first one is actually a very short essay by the man behind Middlebrow Musicals, which, as I've said before, is my favourite musical theatre-based blog online. It's run by a gentleman called Cameron Smith, and you can find it at middlebrowmusicals.blogspot.co.uk, or just type Middlebrow Musicals into your search engine. Now, Cameron always writes compelling essays on various matters about musical theatre, and here's what he had to say about my theory on the divergence between popular music and theatre music. The essay is called Blame It on the Backbeat, and he wrote, way back in Musical Talk episode 328, Comedy Thos, his very kind nickname for me, was mulling rhythmically about the 43-minute mark into the episode. The Thos thesis is that the 1950s saw the beginning of the dominance of the backbeat in popular music. This inevitably had an adverse effect on the lyrics. The insistent rhythm left no room for singers to fully get across the meaning and inflection of the words. Lyrics became mere ornaments to decorate a song rather than an essential part of it. But in musical theatre, lyrics are essential. Lyrics explain and reveal the what and the why of stories and characters. They cannot be subordinated. So, over the following decades, a gradual but inevitable split developed between musical theatre and chart music, a tragedy from which the civilised world has yet to recover. Now, I exaggerate a little. Exhibit A in this thesis is two versions of the song Tonight You Belong to Me. The first is from 1920s crooner Gene Austin. The second is from the 1950s sister hitsters Patience and Prudence. And Cameron says, Spotify them for a listen. The Austin recording has the full verse and chorus and enough rhythmic flexibility to allow the singer to bring out all the nuances of the lyric. The sisters, on the other hand, drop the verse, which confuses the meaning of the chorus, and the singers are straitjacketed by a fixed and dominating rhythm. The different approaches demonstrate how the lyric has lost its significance in chart music, and frankly, my lud, it's the backbeat what done it. If you have a listen, it's certainly a well-judged example. And Thos is in good company. Richard Rodgers was none too keen on the newly enhanced backbeat in pop music. I can't now find the reference, but I'm sure I remember reading about a letter to a newspaper that Rodgers once wrote complaining about the latest hit parade and how he was taught that music was about melody, harmony and rhythm, and so why reduce it to just the latter? Incidentally, and this isn't in the essay, but it is worth mentioning that Richard Rodgers was appalled by Peggy Lee's highly rhythmic version of the song Lover. It's a brilliant version, But he's quite right at one level. It absolutely destroys the meaning of the song, at least within the context of the musical for which it was originally written. But let's get back to the essay Blame It on the Backbeat by Cameron. So, he says, and yet, there is a case to be made for the defence. 1. Most chart music doesn't subordinate the lyric with a backbeat. Even where backbeat is absolutely fixed, the singer will still sing the melody in a very flexible manner, anticipating the beat fractionally, as is done in Latin music, or delaying it, as in swing music. The inflexible interpretation of prudence and patience is really an exception, not the rule. 2. Even if the rhythm is inflexible and dominating, that doesn't necessarily make it unsuitable for musical theatre. Let's say that we rewrote The King and I so that, in an expected plot twist, Yul Brynner and the entire court of Siam are mercilessly wiped out by a Terminator robot sent back from the future to kill Anna. And if Richard Rodgers was writing the Terminator's big number towards the end of Act 2, I suspect he'd want a song with an inflexible and dominating rhythm to express the robotic and unrelenting aspect of its character, and to complement Arnold Schwarzenegger's general acting range. It's not the musical style that makes a song a theatre song, it's the context. And I can actually think of a very good example of this very point in Andrew Lloyd Webber's musical Love Never Dies, where we are introduced to the Phantom of the Opera's newly developed robot workshop, and there's a very rocky, fixed rhythm number to represent the actions of a robot. So let's get back to the essay by Cameron. He then concludes, despite these objections, I'd say that the Thos thesis is basically sound. The predominance of rhythm will inevitably diminish the importance of the lyric, which is problematic for musical writers, although I'd say it's not the only reason why lyrics are less important in chart music. Then again, I can't help but wonder if this is less to do with rhythm and more to do with the difference between a romantic and a modern sensibility. There's an interesting parallel in classical music which, very, very broadly speaking, moved from the 19th century romantic focus on melody, example Tchaikovsky, and harmony, another example Wagner, to a 20th century focus on rhythm. Just as musical theatre has always been a bit uneasy about the heavy backbeats of rock music, it has also never really tried to adopt the cross rhythms of Stravinsky or the minimalism of Steve Reich. Perhaps that's because musical theatre is essentially a romantic form. Or perhaps there's just never been a truly modern musical. Yet. As the song says, eventually the rhythm's gonna get you. Now that was Cameron's essay, and you can find it under the 17th of April 2013 on his excellent website, Middlebrow Musicals. The website again, middlebrowmusicals.blogspot.co.uk. Very, very worthwhile going to. Now, whilst that was the longest comment that we received, it certainly wasn't the only one, not by a long chalk. As I said, last week I had a chat with the composer and lyricist Michael Gordon Shapiro on his thoughts on this matter, and the reason I did that is because he'd also written to me on this very subject. Here are his comments from an email. Hi Thos, I've been enjoying your instalment ruminations on the historical break between pop and theatre music. You recently stated that jukebox musicals are retrospective by nature, and never about bands who were contemporary at the time of the band's creation, citing We Will Rock You, Mamma Mia and so on. It's interesting, to me at least, that made-for-film jukebox musicals often take the opposite approach and scramble for topicality. For example, the Beatles' various live-action comedies, as well as the animated Yellow Submarine. Or, at the other end of the dignity spectrum, the Spice Girls movie. All of these were designed to fan the fires of a band's then-current popularity rather than cash in on nostalgia. I imagine this reflects the different age expectations for film versus theatrical audiences. You also wondered if any songs from rock-style musicals had ever spawned independent success in the pop charts. Though this example pushes the definition of rock, I can remember that One Night in Bangkok from Chess had great success on MTV in the 1980s. In fact, at that time I initially thought it was a pretentious pop song and had no idea that it was a song from a musical. Or who this Murray Head guy was. Well, that's Michael Gordon Shapiro. And in a similar way, I got an email from Enrique Acosta, and he is the writer of Spider Baby the Musical. Here's what he had to say. Just wanted to point out that One Night in Bangkok from Chess and I Don't Know How to Love Him from Jesus Christ Superstar both hit the pop charts. Also, while I agree most use of pop and rock in musicals doesn't quite work, surely that's just a matter of cracking the code. There are several songs in Spring Awakening that do work on their own out of context of the show. And that is the challenge. As someone who's trying to get some success for his rock shows, I can say I've failed more than I've succeeded, but we, rock theatre folk, keep plugging away. Good rock music should stand alone, and writing something that does that and still serves a narrative is the challenge. As someone smarter than me pointed out, music is the sound of our emotions, and sometimes to get the right feeling for the right moment, you do need rock music. And he very kindly finishes off by saying, I only recently discovered your show and becoming a big fan. That's Enrique Acosta. Pop along to his website, www.spiderbabythemusical.com. Well, there we are, a handful of comments, all about the same issue. As you can see, it's generated some interest in the listenership, and I'm delighted. Thank you so much to all those people and everyone else who wrote to me with their thoughts and views on this particular subject. And now seems a very good time to move on to talk to Tim Sayward about all the issues that we've touched on there, including what songs from pop or rock musicals have made their way into the charts. And when they have, does this count as really bridging the gap between popular music as it is today and musical theatre music? I hope you enjoy this discussion with Tim Sayward. Musical talk. Well, Tim, it's good to see you again.
I'll be the judge of that.
We've got a little question. Now, listeners will know that over the last few weeks, months, we've been briefly investigating on a sort of episodic basis almost. When did popular music separate and divorce itself from musical theatre music? And various people have written to me, and we've had several episodes where we've spoken about it a little bit. I'd just like to chew through some of the issues with you. And a good place to start, because this is where the debate has sort of got to, and my thanks to everyone who sent emails, particularly Michael and Enrique recently. I made a statement just dismissing jukebox musicals as being not really part of the equation because they're nearly always retrospective. But in part of that discussion, I was talking about what songs have come out of modern musicals which have genuinely become popular. I mean, we're talking chart popular.
Yes, since being written into the musicals, you mean, rather than...
Yes. And people have identified One Night in Bangkok from Chess.
That's true.
And we were talking about Losing My Mind from...
Follies, yes.
And there are, of course, Phantom of the Opera, of course, is the big...
Phantom of the Opera is a slightly different thing again, because, of course, it was written with a very cynical awareness that it was intended to be a breakout hit.
Yeah.
So, well, there were two, of course. There was The Music of the Night, which became a single later on. But I think the Phantom of the Opera itself, that was the first with a slight electronica sort of edge to it, that was recorded, as you know, by Steve Harley in the very early stages of the project. And Sarah Brightman, I think, was also one of the singers on it, having previously done I Lost My Heart to a Starship Trooper with Hot Gossip. That was basically out there. And it was one of Lloyd Webber's attempts, as he'd done previously before, to create a breakout hit before the show had actually gone on, and then to put the show on in response to people wanting to go and hear the breakout hit. Jesus Christ Superstar with its concept album was and Evita, I suppose, also. Both were examples of that technique as well.
Fun enough, for his show Joseph and the Amazing Technicolor Doodah, it's two different songs. There's I Dreamed a Dream was when it has been used a lot of times.
You mean Any Dream Will Do?
Any Dream Will Do, yes. But Close Every Door to Me was attempted to be promoted as a hit single.
I can't see how that would ever be one, but yes.
But it was.
But of course, that was the other way round, because that was the first show.
Yeah.
They both wanted to be pop writers. Certainly Tim Rice wanted to be pop writers. They just collaborated on this musical for a school, and I suppose... It was merely the fact that parents from it happened to be music publishers and all kinds of other things.
They went to the right school, clearly.
That really got them the attention they needed. But of course, that was it was only retrospectively that became an album and in any way had any chart success. And it really had chart success as an album first, which is probably what put Lloyd Webber in the position of thinking about doing Jesus Christ Superstar as a religious story that could be done as a concept musical, a concept album, before actually translating it back to the stage.
But that brings us back to the original question. How many songs have escaped, let's say, by accident from modern musicals
and made it into the... We were talking about... before we started recording, Wicked is an undoubted massive blockbuster hit, and yet there is no song, I think, that the public will have heard.
No, there's no song that's charted, certainly out of Wicked. I mean, Defying Gravity is generally thought of as the breakout hit in as much as that's the big number that people play over and over again in their bedrooms. But it does that from a position of being basically in the musical theatre chart as part of the album.
But it's not a breakout song at all. If you go into your office and mention it, no one's going to have ever heard of it.
No, I mean, people might have heard the phrase Defying Gravity, but, you know...
The problem is it's not popular. It's not popular.
That's true. And there's another... Yes, there's another novelty number that could have been a breakout hit maybe in the 30s.
Yes, funnily enough. Possibly the one... That's the reason I like it.
However, Stephen Schwartz did do this successfully. And again, not quite in the charting sense, but Godspell features things like Day by Day, which has since become a massive staple for, like, every community choir in the country right across the thing.
I don't know it, though.
And certainly was a popular, was a popular song. So...
this isn't Day by Day, I'm falling more in love with you,
Day by day, day by day.
No, it's not.
Day by day, that one.
Yeah.
If you can recognise it from that, which I'm sure you can't.
Oh, I know the earlier...
So there's that as well in Sonnet. And One Night in Bangkok would have been another example of that Lloyd Webber trick, of course, same collaborator, Tim Rice, where they would have put something out there to become a hit, which in turn would sort of feed the show. He was
working with Andrew Lloyd Webber, though, wasn't he?
That's right. The distinction is between, say, Gershwin writing Tin Pan Alley standards, arranging them into all kinds of different shapes theatrically, and then, I mean, you know more about this area than I do, but I'm assuming, for example, to take, a few Gershwin numbers, were they written as hits first, or were they, and then got chucked back into the musicals, or was it either or?
Well, you're right about Tin Pan Alley, because actually, you look at Irving Berlin's a slightly better example, because he was around a bit before.
Yes.
He was chucking out very successful, very popular, although they haven't lasted, Tin Pan Alley numbers.
Yes.
And then he got into writing musicals.
Yes.
But he, and then the Gershwins and Cole Porter, wrote their musical songs for the musicals. Although, sometimes a number might be hoiked out and then put in another show.
Yes.
So, famously, The Man I Love, which is considered a great song, a Gershwin number, actually was at different times in 3 different Gershwin musicals before it finally sort of hit.
But I mean, does it seem like, actually, when you go back to the Tin Pan Alley era, that it might have been either way around? Something might have been written for Tin Pan Alley and then chucked in a show. It might equally have been written for a show and then chucked out into the world of the sheet music vendors.
And I tell you why I don't agree with that, just to interrupt you there, because Tin Pan Alley numbers were expected to stand on their own and did or didn't, depending on how good they were.
Yes.
But they didn't need to go into a show because they were already popular. You're then suggesting, but if they were popular, would you put them in a show in order to make the show more popular? And I'm not really aware of that, except in a couple of occasions. There's famously the time when Rodgers and Hart had I think it was Jumbo, but they had a musical that was not going well.
Yes.
And so a number was interpolated. Unfortunately, the number that was interpolated was Blue Skies by Irving Berlin, which put their noses out rather, and with good reason.
Yes.
It wasn't even from their own catalogue. So.
But I mean, there's no question that a popular song could have some draw, and if you look at magazines at the time, you can see that a lot of shows were being sold on the numbers that were in them.
But those numbers were written for those shows for the most part.
For the most part, okay.
Yeah.
Well,
I mean,
I'll take your word for it because it's your era more than mine.
But writing shows wasn't that different.
Which is interesting,
now.
Because I was going to say, in effect, little has changed then, hasn't it? Because for the shows where you have purpose-written songs, just leaving aside jukebox musicals for the time being, there is. It just has to be worked a little bit harder on the crossover between the chart music and the popular music and the musical theatre writers has just sort of yawned open a bit more. I suppose one of the last great crossover people was Don Black, who started in London's Tin Pan Alley and Denmark Street, and then gradually worked his way across to musicals. And of course, as I said before, Tim Rice approached Lloyd Webber in the very first place because he was a struggling songwriter, Lionel Bart actually as well, wanting to write popular songs like Anthony Newley and Lionel Bart and all those people he had in the generation immediately before, and also to write musicals at the same time. But it was quite rare.
But even so, I mean, you say Lionel Bart, and yes, you'll quote me Oliver.
Living Doll.
Oh, he had songs. Yes, he had Tin Pan Alley numbers essentially.
He also wrote popular songs too.
And a handful of songs. You're right. In fact, ironically,
yes, and of course Newley. I mean, famously, wrote a lot of charting music of a certain kind.
But how many songs do you think from their shows? I mean, Oliver. Most people probably sing "Food, Glorious Food," although whether it's actually ever been in the charts is another matter.
I think "As Long as He Needs Me" did become a popular song of the day. I don't know if it charted per se, but it certainly became a well-known standard.
What about... But what other Bart numbers from his musicals could you even name, let alone...
Well, I could probably name quite a few.
Yeah,
I know.
so could I. But, right.
But in terms of those that became sort of popular stuff, I mean, I would say, Where Is Love and stuff like that, again, would have been oft performed, and you would have certainly have seen sort of in Variety, and you would have seen in the sort of the 50s Variety era. No, well, not the 50s, the 60s
Yes.
Variety era in that case. And so so they would have been part of the general popular culture in the same way latterly that, for example, I Dreamed a Dream from Les Miserables has become, admittedly 20 years after it really first appeared in a musical, it has been revived as a huge hit, actually, and certainly a charting hit. There's no denying that did come back into the charts.
But even these musicals where a number escapes, it's nearly only one number.
Yes, that's true.
I'm just thinking even things, of a much lower level quality, like Pickwick, which is not in itself a bad musical, but no one's ever going to say... but no one's ever going to say that's a top-ranking musical, but it's got one hit song in it.
Yes, that's true. And would that be the same for the Newly musicals? I suppose it might be. I don't know which way round the Candyman and Pure Imagination, which way round they went. I think it was a Candyman preceding the Willy Wonka film and then got put into it, or might have been written for it and then broke out of it. I'm not sure.
I really couldn't tell you.
No, I'm not quite sure.
And is Pure Imagination a popular hit? Or is it only because people have seen the musical?
Only latterly, but at least it's gone in the direction you're talking about. It's become lodged in the popular consciousness through the dramatic work, and then broken out from that.
We have to be careful not to muddle up popularity because the show it comes from is popular. I mean, in which case the Sherman Brothers would be tremendously popular because so many people know and love Mary Poppins that nearly all those numbers are popular.
Yes.
But they aren't covered very often. When was the last time you turned on the wireless on a Sunday evening and someone was the rap version of "It's a Jolly Holiday with Mary" came blaring into your ear hole?
You should mention that because although you're right, I can't pick out a Sherman Brothers number that's happened to. I can pick out a Charles Strauss number that's happened to. Jay-Z did Hard Knock Life.
He did. From Annie.
Famously from Annie, and based on samples from that. So while you couldn't really describe that as the Hard Knock Life becoming a breakout hit in quite the same way as you're talking about in the Tim Panelli era, it certainly has something to say about its musical quality and about the fact that it was capable of breaking into popular consciousness in a dual way. So it had first... I mean, Annie was a huge success anyway as a film, and therefore many millions of people would know that song in the first place. And Jay-Z's record would have introduced that sample and that section of that song possibly to an entirely new audience in the first place, but also reintroduced it to a wide mainstream audience who might have seen the film earlier and who were getting a bit older but were still into Jay-Z and would have heard it in that way, which certainly would have been my case with it.
I don't know Mr. Zed's oeuvre.
No. Well, the thing is, I take very little interest in Jay-Z, but of course that would have made my ears prick up at that point.
Yes, of course.
I would have recognised the sample.
There's suddenly a resonance in a different way.
Yeah. So it's a more complicated picture, I think, is the way I would say these days. Is that I would say, first of all, the mechanism... It's not the same small group of people anyway doing the songs of the day and the musicals of the day.
That's fair.
Those things have diverged very strongly.
Anyone can do it.
But the people who have managed to keep on with that thing have been the Tim Rices and the Abbas, and the people who actually still cross over between those two worlds. And so ABBA knew how to use the music industry to get One Night in Bangkok out there. Lloyd Webber, I don't quite know from what position, but maybe, had worked out how to get his stuff out there in that same way. And most people who just think of themselves as musical writers, unless they achieve extraordinary success in that, like Sondheim, aren't getting their stuff pushed out into the charts. And
but
of
even
course,
Sondheim's not getting into the charts. I mean,
the one example you gave was Losing My Mind,
and Send in the Clowns.
And Send in the Clowns.
But
yeah, those two.
Nothing more recent than that.
No, that's right. And I wouldn't expect him to chart.
That's 40 years ago.
Which is why things switched around the opposite direction, because people realised that the only way you were going to carry the popular consciousness with you, it was not from the theatre into the
direction changed from
well,
theatre.
I say that, but I mean, as you say, like a lot of people would have gotten familiar with those, or would have gone to those shows, or might have gone to those shows because of the standards as well, or certainly the revivals of those shows. So you do your show on Broadway, it's got lots of things that are going to break out to become hits. Those get printed onto sheet music instead of CDs or YouTube, but basically the same sort of mass distribution method. Out they go into all the regions, into all the provinces, into every bar in the country where someone plays them. People become familiar with them, they become standards, and then some years after that you revive your show in a provincial theatre. There's your selling point, all of those 5, 6, 7 or 8 songs that are well known. And then the love flows the other way, so to speak.
I'm just I still... Let's get more onto then the rock musical, rather than the jukebox musical, because the jukebox musical may be a rock musical by accident. Depends on the genre it's sort of ripping off.
That's right. Yeah, whichever now, band they're trying to do this week.
We were quite rightly. A gentleman wrote to me. His name was Enrique Costa.
Yeah,
and he's a composer in his own right, with Spider Baby the musical, but he was arguing that. And he was very honest. He said, sometimes I get it right, sometimes I get it wrong, but I try to write a rock musical.
Yes. And
it's not beyond the wit of any song, really, to be able to carry the information that you need, both emotionally in the music and presumably narratively through the lyrics. Or at least to get the transition that the song's required to do. But he said that it isn't always easy to do. But what truly successful rock musicals are there?
Hair.
Truly successful.
Well, I mean, it depends how you define success, but I mean, commercially, Hair certainly, which has been revived many times and was a success at the time. We've got Rocky Horror Picture Show, or the Rocky Horror Show, I should say, which of course has had a very, very long life indeed, and it took a slightly circuitous route to being a hit, in as much as it was a small-scale hit at the very beginning, became a bit of a sensation, an overnight sensation, and then has sort of run in provincial theatre. But then the picture show itself took on the film adaptation.
Well, it's now popular because
much more life.
Yeah, partly because it's a successful show, is its songs. But I wonder what songs we all know. The Time Warp. Oops, the Time Warp came out of it. But I was just thinking back to Hair, funnily enough, because obviously Hair was produced in the late 60s.
Yes.
I was a child in the 70s. My father had the wireless on in the morning.
Good Morning Starshine.
Yeah, exactly. Age of Aquarius, various songs. The songs, yes, but none of the original recordings. When I look back now, they were all the easy listening adaptations of them, actually.
Well, I mean, that's not too surprising with standards, really, is it? From the 30s musicals. I mean,
they were already sort of in what we would now call easy listening.
It so happens that Doris Day's Secret Love, for example, as it were.
Be careful how you tread, young master.
She doesn't mind me mentioning it on the air. I mean, it was a Doris Day recording, but was that the original? Well, still wasn't the original artist who did that part. I mean, we're talking Calamity Jane, aren't we? So I'm presuming whoever did she do
Calamity Jane
on the stage?
Was a film musical.
Ah, well, there we go.
So it was. She introduced that song. That's right.
If you want to count Grease, you can, which is a 1970s piece, obviously, despite being sort of 50s score.
Is it rock?
Oh, well, yeah, I'd say it was very much rock and roll era. I mean, again, if you think about something like You're the One That I Want, which was, and Summer Lovin', Summer Lovin' is a fairly, not hard rock, by any
50s
means.
Rock, Elvis rock.
Yeah,
but
certainly
rock and roll, actually, rather than rock.
Yeah, and Summer Lovin' was a hit at the time.
Greased Lightning!
Greased Lightning, exactly.
Yes, it's the one that actually sounds most like a 1950s number to me, funnily enough.
Yes, exactly. So yeah, I think you do see. I think you do often see these things breaking out, but that's become a lot more attenuated lately because just clever commercial people realised that there was a shortcut, and the shortcut was the one that people like the Beatles had been pioneering. With Hard Day's Night and Help and all of those things, where the plot and the story and the narrative became a vehicle instead for pre-existing material, and the rest, as they say, is history.
Which brings us on to that odd hybrid, and once again, somebody who wrote in, Michael Shapiro, made the observation that I had said that all jukebox musicals were retrospective, and so most of them are. But there's this odd hybrid, which is contemporary jukebox, which is normally when a band is sufficiently big and has popularity.
Yes.
And you've just touched upon this. There were Beatles films made during the time the Beatles were in action.
Absolutely.
Which were much more popular, actually, than any subsequent Beatles jukebox musical. I know there's one in London at the moment, but actually it's not really penetrated public consciousness in any real way.
Which one's this? Oh, the Beatles. I've forgotten what it's called already. But
exactly.
There have been several attempts, anyway.
Whereas I suspect everyone's seen even the odd ones like Yellow Submarine, Help, and A Hard Day's Night. And the same occurs with Quadrophenia for the sort of the mod school, if you like, in the 1980s, and
Tommy.
even Spice World, if we want to force ourselves into this. But these are contemporary jukebox musicals, aren't they? These songs aren't written for the musicals, so they're still jukebox, but they are the things that break my rule, which is actually that jukebox musicals are retrospective.
No, they're not necessarily retrospective. The thing that drives jukebox musical, they happen to mostly be retrospective because it's about being tried and tested and about low risk. But when you have a band that was as big as the Beatles, it was already, and the Spice Girls actually at the time. Not that I would compare them in any other way necessarily.
Does that taste like ashes in your mouth as you say that sentence?
But when you've got extremely likely appeal. From something, whether that's the Spice Girls, whether that's the Beatles, whether that's any of the other sort of bands that have trod this path. Not very many, but a few. You could probably, I don't know, you might probably do it in One Direction. Actually, I would have thought at this moment, at least in time, if you're quick.
Yes.
But it's the low economic risk that is the factor.
Yeah.
And the fact that Queen, it might have been a risk to do a jukebox Queen musical during the time that Queen were at their height as popular things. It clearly wasn't a little bit later. So retrospective jukebox musicals are always going to be more common, but there will always be contemporary jukebox musicals when you get a band that's so big that people will go and see it. And Madonna is another example, in the sense that although her film career wasn't necessarily a series of jukeboxes based on her songs, she ran that career and translated some of her songs, Desperately Seeking Susan and things like that.
Which, ironically, if it had a Madonna score on the stage, may very well still be running.
Quite possibly, yeah. They put it together with Blondie, which was a bit of a
and they called it Desperately
choice.
Seeking Susan.
Yeah, I mean, it was all the right bits were there, just not necessarily in the
There were
right
probably
order.
two very good musicals failing
struggling
in
to get out, yeah, exactly.
So are we saying brutally, actually, and I know that we actually are, that the whole damn caboodle is all about commercialism? You asked me in a recent episode of Musical Talk why the Mikado is being revived. Why has it just been revived, the Jonathan Miller 1980s version at the ENO, and why is it regularly revived anyway? And I said cash. I meant it's a flip comment, but it's true. It's tried and tested and will bring in the punters.
Yeah.
You're quite rightly saying these speech mark contemporary jukeboxes are for commercial reasons. The retrospective jukeboxes are for commercial reasons, but because a new rock opera isn't tried and tested, probably. I mean, can Spring Awakening be described as a success? And can you name a song from it?
I certainly can name a song from it.
Can you name?
I know well, and
can you name a song from it
Mother Who Bore Me, and
that your
those.
mother will have heard of?
No, not even Mama Who Bore Me. Although she can do occasions.
Unchivalrous.
I know. Sorry.
Paint the amusing comment.
No, Spring Awakening is not a success in the sense of any of the things we've so far discussed.
Although it's identified as the modern rock musical.
It is, and so was Rent, but those were much more niche products. And it will only be time that tells whether they will ever cross over into new territory. There hasn't been quite the leaping up and grabbing the attention of the world at large that really went with something like Hair. But what I would say is that I would sort of, the way I was describing the sort of distribution of sheet music and things like that, you have to understand there's sometimes a sense that Broadway is the centre of the universe and that's where all things originate from. But in fact, where all the cash comes from that makes these things possible ultimately is the provinces, and ultimately is
the revivals in this country.
Is mass culture, and Broadway for many years, structured its success on the performance of individual songs on the Ed Sullivan Show. And that's how they reached the sort of, the states around New York and wider. The things could go on national tours as a result, and people would come into New York to see those particular shows because they saw that one on the Ed Sullivan Show. So, in a way, nothing's changed. You try to get the direction of travel is the only thing which has possibly changed when you take jukebox musicals as your example. But in between The Phantom of the Opera and Chess and even Les Miserables to a certain extent, going all the way back to the Tin Pan Alley thing, you've got the elite on Broadway, you've got a mass distribution of it, whether it's sheet music, CDs, concept album, whatever, and finally you have a return, a financial return from people coming back to the theatre to experience the mass-marketed product.
But that can often be well down the line, though, can't it?
It can, yeah. It's a slow burn process.
I mean, we were speaking about Top Hat in a previous musical.
Hence contemporary jukebox musicals short-circuiting that.
Yeah.
For the Spice Girls, they didn't have to wait for the product to be out there. The product was already out there. Then they just had to bring it back to the theatre.
But where is the stage version of Spice World? God help us.
Well, it's called Viva Forever, and it's currently
of
running
course.
in London with a book by Jennifer Saunders.
You are absolutely... It goes to show that these don't really ring my bell, but yes, you're right, it is here, isn't it?
Yes, it is. It's
So
there.
in London at the moment, we have that, we have the Beatles, we have Mamma Mia, the Jersey Boys,
Absolutely, yeah.
to name but several
To name but
immediately.
3, yes, exactly.
4, I think, wasn't it?
Yes, and the Beatles one that I can't remember the name of. And so it goes on,
But can we argue then that actually because there's more diversity in popular music? I mean, can we say that most people like the Beatles?
The question is
in the 60s, but not everyone now likes what's in the charts now.
There's another factor in all of this, which is film, because at one time, as we've discussed on other occasions, theatre, particularly in the sort of very early days of cinema and so on, theatre was a mass entertainment form, and so theatre really nowadays relies on getting one product, like Les Miserables is the last great success of this. Les Miserables is interesting to look at because it's been seen by more people than the film Titanic. Okay, both huge cultural products.
If it's any help, I've seen neither.
Les Mis has had to do it theatre by theatre and production by production, and has cost quite a lot of money along the way while it's been doing that, whereas obviously film distribution has a lot of economies of scale in it.
Straight in, yeah.
But a lot of overheads in terms of the advertising, and obviously the original production budget, which was hundreds of millions, as opposed to whatever it cost to put on Les Mis the first time. I'm guessing not quite hundreds of millions. But it's about making a product that can then travel and distribute and be the same in lots of different places. The factory-produced theatre, the product.
Franchise, yeah.
The franchise, exactly, the franchise musical. Film really changed that equation very much, because film, you can actually make a product, like Grease, for example, which I think did live in theatre just before it went into become a film musical, but the film musical is the big deal.
It's now the foundation
very much
stone,
as the Rocky Horror Picture Show is the big deal, really, out of that and the stage version. And suddenly it can be distributed lots of places in the world in one go. So why would a recording artist these days, get to the stage of wanting to do theatre? Theatre's the most expensive hard. It's high profile and high reputation, certainly, to be able to get a product like that. But it's got to be able to scale really well for it to be a commercial thing. Whereas a film might be a slightly different kettle of fish.
However, then that does raise a question, and I don't see the answer, which is, if we're saying that film musicals then begat stage versions which become franchise, which make you the millions afterwards, why aren't we seeing more film musicals?
That is a very good question, to which I don't know the answer. But it's interesting, isn't it?
Yeah.
I mean, Chicago, I should think a lot of the success of Chicago's long run in London would have been somewhat off the back of the film, which is how it would have
Partly, although I think the revival occurred before they made it.
Oh, okay. Well, okay.
Well, I mean, that revival went on for so long.
I was going to say, it may have accounted for its
given another 10
longevity,
years.
perhaps, to a certain extent.
But forgive me, all the recent filmed musicals have been based on stage plays.
Yes,
or stage musicals.
That's probably true, actually.
Even Phantom of the Opera, for goodness sake.
The other way round it's been going is that the plots, as with Desperate Seeking Susan, as with Ghost, as with The Bodyguard, and so on, have been, and quite a number of others.
There's musicalised versions of non-musical films.
Yes, which have been brought back in, and the mass medium in that particular case, and the attraction might be the score, but it might equally be, as with The Bodyguard, it's a song and the plot, isn't it? Those are the two sort of selling points. So, if you think of Gershwin or whoever writing musicals as their primary product, and then objects, bits of those musicals, songs from those musicals, going out and having a life in the wider world, why would you do it that way around nowadays if you wanted to be a commercially successful songwriter? Surely you'd start by being a commercially successful songwriter if you could.
Yeah.
And then take it back to theatre if you really love theatre, because it's a lot easier. Well, I say easier, but it's slightly more likely to work that way around than to do it the way that Gershwin, perhaps you're saying, did. So possibly the reason it doesn't happen anymore is because it's a daft thing to attempt.
Yes, but I still don't understand then why people don't go through the... I mean, obviously making a film is difficult and there are the same commercial imperatives. Yes, people are not going to take a punt.
A film, not so much. I mean, I'm talking about sort of actual, singles, basically, single tracks.
But if you are talking... if you are genuine to talk about long-term investment, that actually... Chicago will generate money for hundreds of years probably now.
Probably, yes.
And part of that will be the film that sort of solidified that for a lot of people.
Yes. Well, I should think a lot of what they made out of West Side Story would be down to the film.
Absolutely, yeah.
Yeah.
That's a very good example, actually.
Yeah.
And funny enough, The Wedding Singer, not that I've ever seen it, but started off, I'm told, as a film
That's
and has
right.
since become a stage musical.
John Pacino, I think. Is it?
Yes.
No. Yeah. Go on. Sorry.
Well, I'm not sure that it's the greatest musical ever written,
No.
but and possibly one or two steps down from that. But it's got a life pure, and that's not The Wedding Singer is not in this country at least. It's not a very famous film.
No.
It's a very average, middle of the road film, which has only been seen by a certain number of people, and not my parents would have never have heard of it, for
No.
example.
Exactly.
And I would never have heard of it if it weren't for the podcast Musical Talk, which I recommend highly to anyone. Although if you've got this stage, you're probably
yes, exactly.
But then the question is, if you're a studio and you've got, if MGM, well, maybe MGM is not a good example, but if MGM has the expectation of being here in 10 years' time, why not pump some money into a few musical films and then start reaping the dividends on stage there afterwards?
It is surprising, you're right, that hasn't happened yet.
Disney do it.
Disney certainly do it, and of course have brought them back into theatres very successfully.
I mean, we should never underestimate Disney's role in the film musical, because
No,
they
well, The Lion
carried
King.
on doing it.
Yes.
When everyone else stopped in the 60s, Disney carried on doing it.
The Lion King's a massive success
Yeah.
because, of course, that
That
underlies one of the big running West End hits, certainly.
And Beauty and the Beast, be my
Beauty and the Beast,
guest,
exactly. And there was
with my court and outrageous accent.
and there will be continued attempts to do those. The Little Mermaid is another
Yeah.
one. I think Alan Menken is doing, or has done. It probably is done. Sorry, I was out of date. So yeah, I don't know why there is not so much the attempt at the original film musical these days, other than they're difficult to do.
But taking us back to the idea of musicals having popular or non-popular, as in the hit parade kind of popular
Yes.
music, bearing in mind that Disney are the unbroken string of musicals right the way back from the 30s to now, they're still making film musicals and always have done. Can I ask you, since the 60s, so after Mary Poppins, what Disney musical hits can you name?
As in chart hits. Well, that's quite
All right,
tricky.
I'll take the 60s out entirely because you've got the Jungle Book as well.
Yes. Well, which of course has got.
I suppose
Want to Be Like
there's
You. And
a hit
Jane
for,
Austen.
the Aristocats has
yes.
and
Well,
Robin Hood has got
the Circle of Life.
a song, but how many of these musicals have got more? Once again, which is back to they can all have a song that escapes, but can you ever find one that's got two songs that have got out?
I'm very surprised if The Lion King didn't, but I'm struggling to think actually what they might be.
What's the hit from the Rescuers?
No, that's
Yeah.
definitely none at all. Yeah, there aren't that many examples of those. But
Even let's be honest, Beauty and the Beast, which was the big one
Which
that
did
really
have a-
started
yeah,
and had a
became a
stage
standard.
adaptation.
yes,
Yeah, we all tale as old as time.
That's
no one's
one.
as old as I am.
yes.
Said Angela
Lansbury,
Saint
yeah.
Lansbury.
She's still working there.
She is, yeah, bless her. But any other songs?
From that one,
Be Our Guest, possibly.
yes.
But is it
Again, it depends really what you mean by hit. you
Yeah.
know, I mean,
we know it through
if we're talking about
Panto,
chart,
for
if we're
goodness
talking about
sake.
chart hits, this is extremely rare, really, for musicals to sort of penetrate, as it were, into the charts. It's just not. It's not something that's been. It happens by accident when it
Yeah.
happens, like something like the Susan Boyle phenomenon, for example.
Yeah.
Or there's a.
You mean someone else adds an extra impetus because it's
or
the
there's
person?
a TV program like Glee that sort of.
Or an advert.
Yes, or an advert that gives you the route that it gets through. So I don't think necessarily it's something you should be expecting necessarily. Again, that time when there was this close link, there's just a lot of stuff out there nowadays, and chart music has just become its own thing
Which takes us
ever
back.
since the 40s. or
Well,
the 50s,
which
and
takes
stuff.
us back to that very first question I asked a good few weeks ago. Why did it separate?
They separated because they didn't need to be yoked together. So whatever imperative might have driven, Gershwin to write Tin Pan Alley songs as part of a musical wasn't necessarily helping musicals become better musicals, arguably. I mean, they were good musicals,
Yeah.
don't get me wrong. But
I have failed to get you wrong, Tim.
thank you. But clearly that art form moved on, as we know. It moved on in the form of Sondheim, it moved on in the form of Bernstein.
Even, dare I say it, Rodgers and Hammerstein, although...
Yes, no, absolutely. In form of Rodgers and Hammerstein. Rodgers and Hammerstein were
really
still
big.
writing quite Rudolph Frimley type of stuff, you know, well into the era when rock and roll had got going. They never caught up with it, and they never tried, I don't think, and neither did Lerner and Lowe or any of that lot. Even Charles Strauss didn't really try that hard. I think he did Bye Bye Birdie, which is famously thought of as a sort of setting a precedent for the rock musical.
But it isn't.
But it doesn't have any. It has barely any rock in it. I think it's one number, pretty much.
Well, we were listening to this just before we started recording, and the rock number is in fact a send-up, isn't it?
It is, yes.
Whereas the actual
it's a spoof,
hit, the hit is Put on a Happy Face.
Which is a classic.
Could have been written in the 30s.
Yeah, exactly,
Or could have been written in Britain or America. It's Vivian Ellis enough to be British.
It is. So, you know, so there's just not that reason to do it. You know, if you want to have a successful show, quite a good way to do that is to write a good show.
But it's interesting because what you've said...
Or cheat and bring in some...
But you've said a very interesting thing there. You said basically musical theatre professionalised, and therefore that's when the separation broke off.
Yes.
Is that because pop music because it doesn't have to, it very rarely does do anything too sophisticated, and songs from musicals, because they're becoming professional, do need to be a bit more sophisticated?
What musicals and pop music can have in common is that you can have... A song can encapsulate a single idea. And that's just as true as for a pop song and for a musical.
Oh, indeed, yeah.
To this day...
Tell a story in your song.
Whatever you're trying to do, and they can both have a hook, which would be a thing that's common to both of those art forms, and they can both have a verse-chorus structure or a different kind of structure.
The Ode to Billy Joe, which is...
Yes, exactly, which is a narrative song,
but tells you a story.
And it's written, and it's in the first person, and it's...
These days will be spun out to two acts.
The one difference that some people would point out between something like Ode to Billy Joe, which became a film, interestingly, later on, and a musical theatre song, is that if you're singing a musical theatre in the first person, you're often singing in the present tense as well, about how you're feeling at that moment, whereas that is a narrated song sung in retrospect.
It is indeed, yes, you're right.
Which is a slight difference. And for a ballad, in fact, that's what you're more likely to find as a hit than you're likely to find as a musical.
You're in the here and now in a musical because you're in the narrative, whereas you're retrospectively...
And you can be in a pop song as well.
Yeah,
you can be very much in the here and now. So it's not so much that's the difference. The difference, arguably, is about how something fits into a specific context. A pop song is a thing in itself. It doesn't have to fit into a specific context, and it is certainly true of a lot of the Tim Pan Alley crossover songs of the Gershwin era that they might happen to be sung in a specific context by a specific character, but they're written in such a way as not to require that context to be there.
Yes.
They're written in such a way that basically you could sing the whole thing through with exactly the same lyrics, and if you'd never seen the show, it would mean nothing less. Or it would mean it might feel a bit different in the context, but basically, you could have a song like "Secret Love," which could be a breakout hit, and you could appreciate that just in and of itself.
Well, here's
and indeed, a song like, I'm trying to think of West Side Story. If there is Something's Coming, you might very well have that as well. There's nothing about that says it has to be sung out the back of Doc's store in New York in the 50s. It's nothing, or in Manhattan. On the Upper West Side specifically. There's nothing about those songs that say they have to belong to that context. They might acquire more meaning the context they're in their show, but they don't have to be in it. And that became decreasingly the case for songs in musicals. Musical dramatism basically developed in such a way, under the guidance of people like Sondheim, such that you wrote things where the dialogue dips back into the music and so on, and integrated far better with it, such that it starts to become difficult to just put on a musical song.
It's no longer play with songs, which is actually what we're saying some of those early musicals actually are.
Sort of were, exactly. There was that lack of genericism. So it was only really when Lloyd Webber starts to bring back things like "I Don't Know How to Love Him" and Tim Rice and Abba doing "One Night in Bangkok," which are sort of carefully written in such a way that they stand alone all by themselves.
But they're designed to do so.
That's right. That they can go and do that same work that the Gershwin numbers had in the past.
Here's a theory then, and we'll never ever see it put into practice because no one would ever be so foolish.
I'm sorry, just to interrupt you. By the way, sorry.
It's all right. You go right ahead, Tim.
Yes, thank you. Spring Awakening actually did sort of attempt to do that. There are a lot of songs in there that are standalone numbers, and indeed in quite a lot of rock musicals. Rocky Horror also has a few of them, I would say, things like Once in a While, that it just didn't happen for them.
Yes. But all right, then let me answer that. Let me address that before I was going to the point I was going to make, which is then, if that's the case, can you take those songs out without causing any trouble to the plot? And if so, is that not going back to the deprofessionalisation of musicals?
Well, as I say, I mean, people do try to write breakout hits, and they still try and do it, even in modern musicals.
But a breakout hit is also a takeout hit.
That's right, exactly.
So you don't need it.
Not necessarily. I mean, if you think about Something's Coming, that very much fits into the...
But do you need it?
Or what about Summer Lovin'? That's a plotty song. But it also tells the story in and of itself.
That's clever. Right. The point I was going to ask you, before I so rudely interrupted...
I'm so sorry.
No, it's okay. Could you take a Gershwin story from the 1920s, let's say Funny Face, take out all the Gershwin numbers, because they're sufficiently generic, because they can all stand alone, or most of them can. You know, you don't need to... They're not plot nexus in anything other than they're underlining, I love you, here's the love song. They don't actually illustrate the love through the love song. Could you then find standalone pop or rock numbers? Let's be honest, let's find heavy rock.
Yes.
So you've got the same 1920s plot, but with modern rock numbers doing what the songs that you've just taken out do, because they're sufficiently generic.
Apart from the music not matching whatever the era of the story was set in.
Huge cultural jar, yes, absolutely.
But you could do that, and in fact, if you think about Spring Awakening, it sort of is a bit like that, because it's a German expressionist drama set in the early part of the 20th century,
and written in,
with a ton of rock numbers chucked into it. And
yet it didn't work.
Well, I think it did work, but
it didn't succeed.
It wasn't a commercial success, but I mean, I thought it worked as a piece of drama mostly, not perfectly, but it did work. I think in theory you could do that, and
I look forward to that revival.
Exactly. Whereas I think you'd find it a lot harder to atomise, in that way, something like certainly West Side Story, but even if you go a bit further into the era of the truly integrated score and the music theatre,
you couldn't do it with a little night.
You couldn't do it with Floyd Collins,
Yeah.
You'd struggle, and you'd certainly struggle to do it with, I should think something like Merrily We Roll Along as well, where the integration of the score is important. So let's talk about that for a second, because the other thing that separates a pop song from certainly the sort of Sondheim-y type of musical number is a pop song, again, is a thing in itself. It has one musical world that you're in. It has very much a beginning and a middle and an end, and it has and it does well. Basically, it's a self-contained thing. Whereas often Sondheim numbers, if you try and sort of play them in your playlist, it's a bit annoying because there's a bit of dialogue there, and you can't play them as a thing in themselves.
No.
They start a little bit. There's a little bit of hesitation. There's a bit of color voce, singing where the rhythm is dependent on some dialogue that's flowing into the song. There's another quote from another song from elsewhere in the score that it sort of flops into that little bit for a bit and then comes back out of it. All of those sorts of techniques, which are about integrated scores, are anathema to successful pop music, because you don't want another bit of a song flopping into your, into your song in an incoherent way. In a way that jars and stops the rhythm and slows it all up.
Let's just sit down and talk about color voce then. Color voce is, and you correct me if I'm wrong here, is where the lyric is paramount for that moment.
What it means is that the specific rhythm that you use in the music follows the speech or sung rhythm of what the singer is singing.
So the lyric comes over the rhythm, rather than the rhythm comes over the lyric.
That's
in
right.
a nutshell.
Yes, that's right.
I mean,
there isn't
basically
a hard regular beat that the soloist has to stick to when they're singing their things. They can vary the tempo, string out a little bit, shrink other bits, and so on.
And you get more of that in a professional.
And the orchestra follows them.
You get more of that in a professionalised integrated musical.
Much more.
Which, in a way, takes me back to the very first point I was making about 1950s songs where the rhythm suddenly starts becoming much more important.
Yes.
Which means that you can't do color voce. Now, I'm sure you can write a musical without the need for color voce, but you're saying that it's a much more integral part of an integrated, professionalised musical, for want of a better phrase.
Yes. I'm just trying to think
so are we saying that rhythm is one of the reasons that popular music had to separate away from the professionalisation of musical theatre?
I think it's got to do with it. I don't think you can.
It's not the sole reason.
You can't sort of isolate that as the only reason. I mean, certainly Cole Porter famously uses color voce sections at the beginning of his numbers that sort of lead you into the song. Yeah. Frank Lesser uses them all the time. They're almost sort of like those sort of plain song chanty bits that you get at the beginning.
Give us an example.
Well, I mean, Guys and Dolls, the title number has like I'll tell you what's playing at the Roxy, story about a man and Biloxi and whatever.
Yeah.
Can't remember the lyrics. And that's, and Cinderella, Don't Turn Down the Prince from How to Succeed in Business Without Really Trying, also has there's several songs there. It's an oft-used technique by Lesser. And you certainly find it in Sondheim, where you're getting into songs. So I think so it's it is oft used, but you don't really get it in Rocky Horror, and you don't really get it in Hair. The song sort of, the introduction starts under the last few lines of dialogue, and then off you go, and you're in a fixed rhythm from.
But I know you love Hair, but would you rank Hair as highly as a classic Sondheim? As a Little Night Music.
I see. Well, as any given classic Sondheim. Depends what you want really from your evening, I suppose.
Do you think it's got the same level of craft? I suppose, right? I'm not in any way denigrating.
I think it's a very different thing, and I don't think it's trying to do at all the same thing as a Sondheim musical is trying to do. A Sondheim musical is trying to be a fully integrated musico-dramatic work. Yeah. That's what they do successfully. Hair, I think, was a happening and an experience and a whole sort of a disordered collection of things which had a lot of zeitgeist in them.
The very phrase I was going to pick.
Yeah, exactly. And I to a certain extent I think Spring Awakening was sort of not necessarily trying to be a fully integrated piece in that same way as well. So I don't think. They're different products.
Yeah, the problem is that musical theatre is so wide a genre. Yes, but in fact, actually, it's almost meaningless. It's in fact, yeah. Whereas, in fact, which is why we use all these subgenres,
what I'm saying
rock
is
musicals and jukebox musicals, blah, blah, blah.
I think you've got things like Hairspray. You've got a little bit of both. If you look at things like Bat Boy, which come off the back of sort of thing, the Hairspray type of era musical.
Hair Boy.
Yes, or the Bat Boy predates it, of course, as a musical. It uses a mixture of techniques, and some of it's color voce, some of it is much more, just hard driving, specific rhythms.
But some of these are pastiche, aren't they? I mean, Hair is not a pastiche. Bat Boy is, isn't it?
Hair is a real weird mixture of.
Gosh, is it far out, man?
It's very far out. It's eclectica, really, because one thinks of it as a rock musical, but again,
it's a hodgepodge.
So many of the songs are not at all, or they're classically based and they're folk songs, or
but it's still
easy to be hard and stuff like that.
But you couldn't go to Hair and say, "Oh, look, there's the Sondheim pastiche, there's the Gershwin pastiche," which you can do with Bat Boy.
Yes, that's true. Absolutely, but going back to this thing about rhythm, I think you do find that there are musicals, and Grease would be yet another example. Apart from, unless you count Automatic and High Dramatic, Why It Could Be Grease Lightning, that's a color voce section, but it's very short.
Yes,
and then you're straight into the song. Most
they
of the
missed
time,
out Pop-O-Matic, didn't they?
With
the favourite dice device.
They did. Most of the time, you're just hitting the rhythms and you're making it a song in itself, and the drama doesn't suffer from that. I don't think it's a bad technique. I just think it's a different sort of technique. A different way of getting into songs. And I think that they'll be doing it with the Spice Girls songs and whatever else.
Yeah.
Beatles, much harder. Beatles are very strange.
Why do you say that?
Well, I mean, at some point a Beatles jukebox musical will come along that works, but there's never been
long time coming, though.
Yeah. They are highly eclectic. They're a mixture of pastiche, depending on which era of the Beatles you're looking at. They're a mixture of all kinds of different pastiche styles. It's really hard to strike a tone, and some of the lyric writing is, unless you take something like Rocky Raccoon, which is a pastiche ballad, they don't necessarily tell coherent stories. I mean, you have things like Eleanor Rigby, which do.
Hey, Bulldog!
But how are you going to get that into contextualise that into a musical? It's so specific to the particular story it's telling. Things like She's Leaving Home. And on the other end of the scale, you've got absolutely mad things like Glass Onion that you're never going to crowbar into a musical theatre plot without doing what Ben Elton did for We Will Rock You and changing half the character names to things like Galileo Figaro and stuff like that.
Look, here's our hero, Dr. Foster!
Exactly. It's just... Dr. Robert, you mean?
Oh, was he Dr. Robert?
Yes, that's right, from Revolver. So I think
not Dr. Foster, who famously went to Gloucester
in
inclement weather conditions.
I don't believe that was Lennon McCartney originally.
Or McCartney and Lennon.
Exactly. So I think it's so I think that'll be difficult. But yeah.
But yeah. And I think, ladies and gentlemen,
that's my case.
And in that very brief summing up at the end there, well, Tim, I think that was a really interesting gallivant round, well, in some senses, the last 100 years' worth of musical theatre.
Yeah.
And any trends we can draw from it, which I'm afraid
There aren't very many trends
Yeah.
we can draw from it. We're at a very uncertain place. Either the jukebox musical becomes the overall
Model.
mode for how people do... I mean, again, we're talking about theatre here. Let's just imagine that. I suspect it's more likely that we will stick mainly... The majority of the product, as it were, will be films and existing music readapted back into theatre far more than it is originally written stuff.
Conversely, there are always going to be people who want to write musicals.
There will always be people who want to write musicals, and occasionally those people will be famous enough and a drawer in their own right with their name that they can do it, like Tim Minchin, for example, and you know the art of the custom-written musical will still survive through, I suspect, those sorts of people. Everyone else can just forget it.
Yeah. And on those cheerful words, musicals fans, I think that probably brings us to the end of this discussion, really.
It certainly does, and possibly of original written musical theatre by unknown writers.
Tim, all I can say is thank you very much for sharing your thoughts on that. And let's go and shoot ourselves.
Yes, all right. Ta-da.
You first. Musical talk. That was Tim Sayward, and as you can see we had a full and wide-ranging conversation which took us in a way back to where we started from. Was rhythm in the 1950s the reason for the disparity between musical theatre songs and popular music being created in the first place? I have to say I'm very much taken by Tim's suggestion, but actually the reason they separated was because there was no need for them to be yoked together any longer, and in particular the reason for that being the professionalisation of musical theatre, and also, hand in hand, the way of getting songs to become popular was changing mechanistically, with television and radio becoming, in a way, the prime method for becoming popular, if you're a song, than musical theatre. In a way, musical theatre spun off from popular songs, rather than popular songs spinning off from musical theatre. Now, once again, that's an interesting question. Do you agree? Don't forget, write to me if you like, at thos@musicaltalk.co.uk if you have any comments. I'd be delighted to hear them. This is one of those conversations which I think might roll on, and merrily will roll along forever and ever. Well, that's about it for this episode of Musical Talk, but there's just enough time for me to say, on a completely different note, perhaps if you're in the east of London at the moment, you might like to put into your diaries a forthcoming event, which is The Music Man. You've got trouble right here in River City. Yes, that's The Music Man. It's the great musical by Meredith Willson, and originally featured Robert Preston on both the stage and in the film versions. Now, that's being put on by the Ilford Operatic and Dramatic Society, and you can see that at the Kenneth More Theatre in Ilford Town Centre between the 20th and the 22nd of June. If you want to go to the box office, go to the Kenneth More Theatre box office or phone 020 8553 4466. That's The Music Man in East London's Kenneth More Theatre in Ilford. Well worth seeing. So, until we speak again on this or any other subject, I hope you have a very nice unit of time between now and your next listening to an episode. I can't tell you how long that's going to be, only you know. But try and keep it as short as possible. Goodbye. This episode of Musical Talk presented by Thos Ribbits and Tim Sayward and edited by Thos Ribbits. Copyright Musical Talk 2013. And why not go along to our website and listen to previous episodes at www.musicaltalk.co.uk.